Welcome back, and thanks for sticking around with me into the 4th episode. Let's do a quick recap of the ground we've covered so far. We're on our journey to masculine adulthood, which is the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. This used to be how men lived for centuries in community together. We may feel alone on our journey, but we always have art to accompany us and speak to our center about things we need to hear: beauty, truth, and virtue. As we continue on the road, we open up vistas of connection with the people in our everyday lives, and even strangers, via the simple and yet courageous act of listening with our whole selves, mind, heart, and body. And we find we're not as alone as we think, and maybe we never were. In this episode, we're going to build on all of that in a surprising direction, because I'm not taking you further outward into history, the lives of other men, or even of strangers. With all that squared away, we're moving in another direction, inward. Are you ready? Then let's get started. I want to do a little visualization exercise with you to help orient you in space and illustrate some of the things I'm going to talk about in this video and the next. And the commitment you put towards this visualization might determine what you take away from these videos as a whole, because I'll give you a little hint. There's a plan to all these videos, a purpose and a direction, and I think you're going to like it. Okay, to start with, get comfortable. If you can, close your eyes. Set aside all your worries just for a minute. They'll be there when you get back. I want you to picture yourself standing in the sun on a dirt footpath. It can be one you've walked on before, or one that you've just imagined right now. The footpath extends behind you some distance, meandering through a green, grassy field. Feel the comfortable warmth of the sun on your skin, and a light breeze if you like. Now, picture that this footpath has led you to a dark forest, which you're standing at the edge of. You haven't yet entered the forest, but if you were to take one more step, you'd be in the shade of the trees, and that's what's creating the darkness of the forest. Not that it's evil or wicked, but the forest canopy is so thick with leaves and life that the sun is obscured, at least as far as you can see. As you're standing there in the sun, on the footpath, at the edge of the forest, you know that deep in the heart of the forest is something that you need. And not just you, but your father, or your mother, your siblings or your family, or even your whole village, nation, or tribe. You know for a fact it's in there. You know that only you can get it. If you can't do it, no one will. Now, how do you feel? Make note of that feeling, whatever it is, because we're going to come back to it. Okay, open your eyes, but don't let the forest and the footpath fade too far away. Now I'd like to ask you a question. Were you alone on the footpath? If you're anything like most men these days, the answer was probably yes. That tendency to imagine ourselves alone is a symptom of our modern isolation as men. Because I never said picture yourself alone on the footpath. I just said to picture yourself there. You could have pictured yourself with an elephant, an army, or even your great Aunt Maud. But our imaginations as men have been so unalterably changed by the lone wolf archetypes portrayed by James Bond, Rambo, Indiana Jones, and others that when it comes to adventure, we instinctively picture ourselves alone. This idea can be just as terrifying as it is inspiring, because it means we have to do it all ourselves. James Bond and Indiana Jones can do it because they have screenwriters and plot armor. We don't have that luxury, or I don't anyway. Which is why no man, not even an elite soldier, operates alone. Elite soldiers like the Navy SEALs and the US military work in teams, and each man has a specialty. This is called interdependence. Each man is self-sufficient, but as a team they can accomplish things none of them could do alone. This is part of the appeal of team sports, like soccer or basketball. Leo Messi, Stephen Curry, and Tom Brady are incredible players, but it's the presence of the elite team members around them, each with a different set of skills, and all complete players in themselves, that elevates Leo, Stephen, and Tom to the legends they are. Or think of a symphony orchestra. While our eyes and ears are fixed on the soloist, the unbelievable skill of the other players around him or her sets the stage, so to speak, of the beauty we're taking in. At the highest level, any one of those musicians could make us weep, sing, or shout with joy in their living room. But together, orchestrated by a master like Carry On, they create transcendence. Or think about the actor in the movie, delivering the decisive line that lifts the hero into action and triumph and the audience into catharsis. While the actor is delivering his line, literally 100 people are behind the camera. The director, the producers, the camera and audio techs, the lighting team, assistants, interns, even chefs preparing food to feed everyone. Then later, musicians composing and performing the score, editors, computer graphics artists, the list goes on and on. If you've ever watched a movie credit crawl, you know that thousands of people, sometimes around the world, all work together to make that one actor's line hit home. Their excellence and seamless performance as a team makes that moment possible. Why should our lives as men be any different? I'll give you a hint, they're not. But we've lost the truth of this in our modern isolation. That's why I gave you the example of the Moroccan hammam and the Japanese onsen in episode 1. What we've lost in the West, this spirit of unity and community of men, other cultures have preserved. So it falls to us, men of the West, to bring that spirit back. Now I want to show you how this is true in your life today. In episode 1, I talked about the Renaissance of men, about how it's a worldwide movement to reunite many different kinds of men to each other. Warriors, poets, scientists, philosophers, and more. Now, I know that it exists because my interactions with these different kinds of men and the content they've produced has transformed me from a scared, boyish version of myself into the man I'm proud to be today. And many of these different kinds of men, from sculptors to psychologists, bodybuilders and musicians, hunters, pastors, and painters, I've interviewed on my podcast. So I know, beyond doubt, that these men are out there. Then in episode 2, I talked about how great artists are your forefathers, that you are the inheritor of their legacy. They too are different kinds of men producing many different kinds of art. For every saintly poet like George Herbert, there's a drunkard like Charles Bukowski, or a seducer like Andrew Marvell, all of whose work I've read in my poetry series. Antonio Vivaldi, composer of the Four Seasons, my favorite classical music piece, was a Roman Catholic priest, while Mozart fiddled, pun intended, with scatological humor in his private letters. Hemingway, Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis were all soldiers in the First World War. Oh yeah, and Socrates, he was a decorated military hero too. So let's do away with the notion that the great men of history fit any singular kind of mold. And like the leaders of the Renaissance of men, the great artists of history are with you too. So on one hand, you have the men of the Renaissance, and on the other, you have the great artists of history. Are you starting to feel a bit less alone yet? And we have one last step, which is to learn to listen to the people around you with your mind, heart, and body. Now, I know this is a challenge, and sometimes it can be tough to talk to strangers, including because strangers these days aren't always used to being talked to. But in the examples I provided of sports, the military, and music, you can see how many different kinds of men come together to make the world go. You participate in this by talking to the men in your environment, listening to them with courage, and leading. And you can find this courage seeing those kinds of men, their strengths and weaknesses, accomplishments and failures, fears, hopes, and dreams reflected in you. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce you to one of the most important books written about men ever. If you'll recall in episode 1, I mentioned Iron John by Robert Bly. To me, that book helped kick off the Renaissance of men and catapulted men's inner experience into the national consciousness in a way nothing else ever had. Robert Bly had two contemporaries, psychologists by the name of Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. As important as Iron John was, and still is, Moore and Gillette's book served as a companion piece that only bolstered Iron John's influence. Remember what I said about men being stronger together? The difference between the two books, however, is that Moore and Gillette's work still has influence to this day. Iron John is a classic that men discover, but I hear Moore and Gillette's book mentioned basically once per week, because they came up with a framework that helps men understand and transform their inner lives so they can approach their outer lives in a new way as well. That book is called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, Rediscovering the Archetypes of the Mature Masculine. And I hope something in that subtitle sounds familiar. So, what is this book about? It's about the different faces of masculinity that live within each one of us as men. Now, Moore and Gillette were Jungian psychologists, and as a Christian man, I can't endorse everything that Carl Jung or his mentor Sigmund Freud stood for. However, Jung's idea of archetypes is useful for understanding the mind as long as you don't take it too far. An archetype is a bit like a Platonic form, but for the human psyche. Plato said that every material, physical thing is based on the perfect form of it, which resides somewhere in the immaterial realm. Every chair is based on the perfect idea of chair that lives somewhere outside of physical reality. The same is true for trees, cats, mountains, etc. That perfect idea outside of physical reality is called the Platonic form. In the same way, an archetype is an idea that lives in the immaterial realm, but that relates to human experience. The archetype of the lone wolf hero, for example, comes from this immaterial realm, but it also lives in our minds as humans. We recognize it instantly when we see it. No one has to explain to us why Luke Skywalker appears to be doing everything alone when our lives rarely work that way. We understand that the lone hero on a quest is an archetype, which is why his character and so many others resonate with us. The immaterial realm that archetypes come from is called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological heritage of the entire human race. So now, let's get back to the book. Moore and Gillette outline 4 archetypes that are the shared psychological inheritance of all men, or at least all Western men. And those are, as you might have guessed, the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. These are not 4 different kinds of men. These are 4 different faces of all men. That means you, yes you, and me too. Whether you weigh 110 pounds soaking wet and have never lifted a sword or a barbell, the powerful warrior lives in you. Whether you're a battle-hardened veteran who has trouble letting people get close to him, the sensitive lover lives in you. Even if you think you're too dumb to master the kazoo, you've got a wise magician in you. And every man has a king inside him too. The problem is not that you don't have these aspects of you. You do. As men, we all do. The problem is that some men are strong in one archetype, others are stronger in another. I think you can imagine a few men in your life who are really good at getting stuff done, but don't really know how to relate emotionally. Those men have well-developed warrior archetypes. And I'm sure you know of other men who are really good at in-depth conversations about love, fear, pain, and joy, but who struggle to really take action in their lives. Those men have well-developed lovers. Or maybe you know the guy who's absolutely brilliant and book smart. I'm talking galaxy brain, but he struggles to talk to people and isn't much of a physical specimen either. Those men have well-developed magicians. Our challenge as men is to take those archetypes we're weak in and cultivate them to balance out our personalities. That is how we achieve a mature masculine psyche and how we achieve true masculine adulthood. Especially because the archetypes we're weak in don't go away. There's still parts of our personality hiding in the shadows, where they can take on a life of their own. That's why a man with a really developed lover archetype who's great at feeling can suddenly burst with rage. The suppressed warrior is coming out all at once. And that's also why powerful warriors can break down in tears unexpectedly. The suppressed lover is coming out often at the wrong moment, and so on. Obviously, each of these archetypes has a lot to them. I don't mean to reduce them down to monolithic entities. The warrior archetype is as much about physical strength as he is action in the world. The lover archetype isn't just about emotions, but sensuality and pleasure. And the magician isn't just about wisdom, but mastery. And the king, well, we'll get to him. The book, of course, goes into great depth about all of these and more. But for now, you can think of them in the following way, which I learned from one of the most well-known, successful, and well-balanced leaders of the Renaissance, Elliot Hulse. He's a former competitive strongman, but he's also a husband, father, trainer, coach, and a man who's been on his own journey of personal development, which has been inspiring to watch unfold over the years on YouTube, proving that the multidimensional man is not only possible, but achievable, no matter where you start. Elliot breaks down the archetypes this way. The warrior is about doing. The lover is about feeling. The magician is about thinking. And when our doing comes into balance with our feeling, and both of those come into balance with our thinking, what emerges in us is being. Being as in peace with who we are, what we have to give, our capacity in the world, our gifts, and even our purpose. That is when the king stands up. And just as the warrior, lover, and magician live within you, so does your king. All of these archetypes are not things you have to go out in the world and get. They are parts of you right now, and they always have been. In fact, I bet that no matter which archetypes you're strongest in, you've gotten at least a glimpse of the other ones in their fullness. I bet you can go back into those memories right now and remember when you truly felt like a warrior, ready to take on the world in the best possible way. Or a lover, able to feel deeply without losing your sense of self. Or your magician, wisely knowing the answer and able to communicate it in a way that inspires and lifts up those around you. And you've experienced your king, even in a fleeting moment, as the man you could be. You become him when your warrior, magician, and lover step forth in you and come into balance and reconciliation with each other. This is your soul, as in SOUL, inheritance as a man. It is all of ours. Now, I'd like to go back to the forest. Hopefully, you haven't let it recede too far into your memory. Remember where we were. Sunshine, grassy field, footpath, dark forest. the shade of the trees, just one step away. Inside the forest is something you and your tribe need, something only you can get. And within you there was a feeling. Maybe it was fear or anxiety. Maybe it was pride or excitement. Maybe it was curiosity. Whatever that feeling was, bring it up. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to start adding to your vision. Keep your eyes closed. Imagine on either side of you, extending as far into the distance as you can see, other men are standing at the edge of the forest on their own paths. Hundreds or perhaps even thousands of men staring silently into the deep. Look around you. See if you can see them. Those are the men of the Renaissance, like you. Now, imagine walking from path to path and man to man are other men, stronger men, confident and powerful men that you admire, with joy in their eyes and hope in their voice, shouting words of encouragement to your brothers on their paths, urging them forward under the canopy. Those are the leaders of the Renaissance who have been my teachers. Now look behind you and see extending far into the distance great artists through all of history: Homer, Shakespeare, Milton, Dante, Da Vinci, Vivaldi, Beethoven, Picasso, Hemingway, Dickens, Kipling, Neruda, Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and more. Their gifts of beauty, truth, and virtue are with you always. Now, finally, look within you and see within your own heart your warrior, your lover, your magician, and your king. They are not only with you, they are part of you. I bet you can feel them, or maybe you can even hear them. That feeling that was there during the first visualization, what's it like now? Has your anxiety and fear turned to hope? Has your pride or excitement solidified into confidence? Has your curiosity become anticipation? I hope so, because past the self-imposed prison of isolation, this is the truth. Right now, around the world, thousands of men are standing at the edge of their own personal forest. Hundreds of leaders, many of whom are my friends and who I know personally, are urging them on. Artists from all of history have a galaxy of beauty, truth, and virtue for you to explore that is at your fingertips. And within you are wonders and treasures of masculinity that you have yet to discover, that can only be cultivated and which can never be taken from you. You are not alone. Now, if you're anything like me, you're ready to go charging into that forest. I'm ready. But there's still one more piece, and that we'll get to in the next video. But in the meantime, I want you to spend some time in that visualization this week. I know that some men are stronger at making mental pictures than others. This isn't a good-bad thing. It's just how our minds are wired. For you men who are strong at visualization, take what you've seen and refine it. See how many senses you can perceive that moment in. Can you even smell it? For the men who aren't strong at visualization, listen to the last couple minutes a few times. Understand what it means in your own words, or write out the vision. Describe it in the language that makes the most sense to you. I also recommend the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. You can buy it in both print and Kindle. You can also watch or listen to my podcast with Douglas Gillette. He's a brilliant and lovely individual and a man I'm happy to call a friend. In the next video, we're going to complete our journey together. For now, you're going to love it. I've worked hard to make the journey worth it. I look forward to seeing you then.